presentación. Ahí está. Señor Fuentes, Coronel Rojas, colegas, amigos todos, gracias por invitarme a hablar con ustedes sobre temas muy serios por mí, profesional y personalmente. Esta es mi segunda vez en Colombia. Hace 3 años tuve el privilegio de participar en una conferencia especial organizada por mis queridos amigos, el coronel Pedro Rojas y profesor Philippe Dufour de Canadá. Philippe no pudo acompañarnos hoy, pero su espíritu de conocimientos están conmigo en esta conferencia. Ojalá pudiera darla en español, pero esto es todo el español que tengo por ustedes hoy. Okay. I'm starting with okay, here is me speaking English. I'm starting with my positioning, and I'm going to talk a lot today about, I'm going to mention 2 words, positioning and sensors. I don't see how we can do anything in the world strategically without them. Whenever we read a book, or we see a video, or see a movie, or we hear a lecture, it's important to know who the person is talking to us, what is their background, views. It helps us understand and reflect on ourselves when we hear their materials. So, beginning with me. First and foremost, I am Team Israel. Politically, I am Team Israel, and I like my team to win every time. I don't like Israel being the black sheep or the victim. We've done that in the past, so I like us winning. And this is a photo from the last Olympics in Tokyo. Our judo team, men and women, didn't do so well individually, but it was the first Olympics when there was also a team of men and women together, gender-neutral team, and in the general neutral team, we took 3rd place. So, Team Israel. Okay, I think it was mentioned also in my bio, I'm also a soldier. You know, in Israel, we all, at the age of 18 years old, it is a compulsory service. From 18 to 20 for women, from 18 to 21 for men. In my profession, I trained snipers. I was a lieutenant. You can see me, oops, sorry. You can see me over here. Looking at the camera. These are M14s, by the way. They're from the Vietnam War, and we used them until 2000 or something. And one more thing, why is it important for me to mention that I'm a soldier? Because existentially, when soldiers talk about war, it is very, very different than when other people talk about war. I'm also a doctor. Why am I mentioning it besides the fact that I really like my subject matter, award-winning? The book is in English. I actually talked to mi hermano Pedro that we may translate it to Spanish. Besides the fact that this book is about special operations and deep operations and systemic operational design, it is also a reflection of how to think critically about the world. And when I'm saying critically, I mean to think, if you remember the movie The Matrix, is to remember that we, as critical thinkers, who want to understand the reality that keeps on changing, we have to think in 3 different levels of awareness. The first one is the obvious one. It's the ontology. It's what we see, it's what we hear, it's what we sense, going back to our sensors. It's what we feel, it is tangible, and this is what we usually do. If you think about the spaghetti map of Afghanistan, German crystals spaghetti map, it's all about the ontology. The second level of awareness is the structures of our knowledge. It's the lenses that we look through at the world, and that's how we interpret it. If at some point we thought that the Earth was flat, this is how we interpreted phenomena. Then we understood that it is round, and this changed our understanding. So the second level of awareness is the structures of knowledge. And the third level of awareness occurs when there are paradigm shifts, which means that we can no longer understand reality through those structures of knowledge, and then we have to change them. And this is hard, and we don't like to do that. So I'm also a doctor, and I exercise critical thinking. And finally, with all due respect to the academy, without friction with reality, we're just theories filled with black holes. So my laboratory for 20 years has been the Israeli Defense Forces General's course. And although I didn't practice generalship myself, I'm a lieutenant, this is all that I saw. We were in the same laboratory together, the instructors and the generals. We followed them also to their jobs later on, so this is where the experience comes from, and they shared with us their insights, understanding, frustrations, and challenges. In this photo, obviously I have an ego as well. In this photo, this is a photo from about 2 months ago. From left to right, this is our J2, Oded Basyuk. He was my student. Next to him is the commander of Northcom Command, Amir Baram, the paratrooper. He was also my student. To his right is the Chief of General Staff, Aviv Kochavi. He was also my student. And on the total right is our new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, who wasn't my student, but he's a colleague and acquaintance, and we used to talk about the geopolitics of Israel before he became a parliament member. So practitioners is also a view that I hold. So you've heard operational design or systemic operational design. In short, we call it SOD. Let's break it down a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time around it. You can go to the website of the Archipelago of Design and see many written and videos and podcast materials on systemic operational design. Now, when we say Archipelago of Design, it doesn't mean that all of us exercise military design in the same way. I'm only talking about the Israeli view of design, although we were the pioneers of design, and you can actually read it from, it's in Spanish, on the pioneers of design, an interview I did with Shimon Aved, so you can take a look at it as well. So when we say system thinking, we're not talking about hard systems, we're not talking about engineering systems, we're talking about living systems, which is the ecology of humans together, and this is hard to measure and hard to comprehend, and we need the language of systems to understand it. Fritjof Capra is one of the philosophers we like to use. He's a great man. Maybe one more thing about systems. When I say systems, I'm talking about complicated things. When we say that something is complicated, it is hard to execute. When we talk about complex systems, we're talking about systems that are hard to understand. This is very different. And it's a much greater challenge. It's much more abstract. And this is what we think generals are challenged with. Not the type of complicated problems. For that, they have enough people beneath them to do the job. Operational art. Operational art is very military, but in essence, it's the embodiment of system thinking to operational conduct. We came after the Soviets, actually the Russians, almost 100 years ago, and then the British acknowledged it, and then the Americans acknowledged it, and then Shimon Aved, who was mentioned, brought it also to the IDF. It is a combination of command, theory, and operational maneuvers in different contexts, and keeps changing as well. Every time reality is changing. And finally, design. Now, we see these days militaries taking design from business schools or from design schools like IDO or MIT or Harvard, take this language, you hear a lot about empathy and stuff, and then they bring it to the military, and we think it's a problem. For defense purposes, we need to choose words, concepts, terms very carefully, because it's not the same. Again, going back to the soldier view of life, about life and death, and the existential view of design. This is, by the way, a photo from one of my favorite spots in Israel, in Jerusalem, in the Israel Museum. It's a work by an international artist called James Turrell. He called it a space that sets. And basically, it's a huge room, shape of a pyramid. You see the top the top is open, and you see it very. You sit low and you look up, and you see the sky, but the sky keeps moving. This is very, very zen. And there are some installations of James Turrell all over the world, maybe in Colombia as well. But when we say design, and this is the most important thing for us, when we bring design to the military, and when we bring design to generals, I'm not talking about other places when maybe you do innovation and you use the language of design. I'm talking about design for generals, for those who are at the top of the pyramid. The most important thing is how to connect things together that are not of the same making. Connect logic, which is abstract, with form. Connect strategy, which is totally without rules, to tactics, which are all about rules, and so and so. This is where it gets again complex, and we use the language of design and architecture to explain and do things. And this is our model again. I'm not going to go to it in detail, go to the archipelago of design and read about it, but this is our model of thinking. This is our methodology of thinking about reality. In the small z, you can see we start from orientation in a moving world. We try to understand reality as a system. We devise strategy from this understanding. And we divide, the strategy is the logic, and then we devise operations, which is the form. But the organization as a whole is doing many inquiries at the same time, because there is one in Southern Command, there is one in Central Command, there is one that the Air Force is doing, the one that the Navy is doing, there is one that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is doing, and maybe each ambassador are doing their own thing. So if you look at it from the state perspective, you have a system of systems, you have a system of strategy, you have a system of inquiries, and there is no computer to this day who can do this for us. We also mentioned disruptions in the headline of this talk. Again, I did a TED talk on it, 9 minutes of your life. Look at it in the Archipelago of Design website. When I go to it in details, talking about 6 degrees of freedom, or how to think in a destructive way about what we do. I'll just mention 3 ideas here in short. The first one I already mentioned. For us, the Z model of inquiry, operational design, is just a new tool of navigation in uncharted waters. And since reality keeps changing, if you ever read War and Peace by Tolstoy, he has a saying there that the general is always in the middle of a moving sequence of events. So the general is always in a moving. And it keeps changing. We never start anything, or she never start anything from scratch. They're always going to something that is already in motion. So we need to find a way to navigate through all this information. The other one is otherness, or the veil of ignorance. If you ever read John Rawls, when we're generals, we're always looking for the difference in what we see and not similarities. When we are in the warfighting domain, we look for things that are similar or similar enough so that we can take something from our tools, existing tools, and use it. This is like the OODA loop of John Boyd, if you know the concept. Close the circle as fast as you can based on your experience. So you look for similarities. But when you are generals, when you are senior officials at the head of the pyramid, your job is to see what is threatening or challenging the system from the outside. So you need to look for, again, with sensors, what is different, what is challenging the system, and when the best way to do it is learn from other people's experience. And this is me on the stage talking to you about Israeli experience so that you can use it as a reference, but then only take from it what is relevant to Colombia. So this is what we call otherness. And this is also from cultural studies. As you mentioned, multi-dimensional view of the world, so this is part of it. Culture, anthropology, and so on, we call cultural intelligence. And the last one, I guess you recognize it from Star Wars, Darth Vader, or venturing into the dark side. When I'm saying venture to the dark side, whenever I work with NATO militaries, and this is most of the work that I do, which is the British, the Canadians, the Americans, Scandinavia, they are true believers in transparency. Nothing is escondido, bajo de la tabla. It's all out there. The strategy is published in white papers, and we follow the international rule of law, and we expect everybody else to do the same. We're always surprised that it's not working. And I need to really extract from them what they don't dare even say or think, okay? Because it's politically sensitive, because it's, me too, it's not politically correct. You shouldn't talk about your bosses, even if you know that they're not thinking critically or not understanding stuff. So there are all these shackles you put on your own kinds of thinking that you need to let go of, which we call 6 degrees of freedom. There are ways to do that. So this is also something we encourage with our generals, which we call the tacit knowledge, the intuition. What you talk about when there are conferences, you leave the conference room at break, and then you talk about the really interesting things over coffee, over tinto, right? So we try to bring it to the inquiry, talk about everything that is sensitive. It's very intimate, you have to trust each other. It's all about trust as well. How do you do it? And you also mentioned, you mentioned framing. Again, we take snapshots in time. We kind of stop reality in a very artificial way just to try to understand. And we know that we've stopped it, and we know that we will be lagging behind. But this is our time to create a systemic understanding. And again, there are many good materials about it that you can read. Okay, the last concept, and then I'm going to talk about Colombia and Israel, which is censoring. And we talk about 3 kinds of censors. I'll start with the tactical censors, or the war-fighting censors. The civil war in Syria began in 2011. And in 2011, the regional division that was in charge of the Golan Heights on the Israeli side was traditionally, especially after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, an armored division. And this armored division was supposed to stop divisions and armies of the Syrians and Syrian commandos going to charge from the Golan Heights down the Galilee to the center of Israel. So it was an armored division. But the company commanders who were doing the routine tours on the border, and there is a very simple border, by the way, between Israel and Syria. It used to be from 1974 to 2011, a very quiet border, with some agreements, again, under the table. He started seeing things that he didn't recognize. First of all, he didn't see the military. The Syrian military was gone. So there was no military in the Golan Heights, but there was a lot of military movement by Al-Qaeda, by the beginning of ISIS, by all kinds of, I'm going to say terrorist, but resistant groups, and they started seeing refugees, and they started seeing people coming to defense, and now we don't know when they come to the border if they're Syrians or not Israeli sympathizers, that they came asking for help. So the company commander understood that there is potential here to start talking with these people, to start gaining intelligence, because they didn't have any understanding of what was going on the other side. And this very simple intuition of the 20 company commanders, are about 25 years old. So his intuition, he was brave enough to take it to his brigade commander, to take it to the division commander, to bring some intelligence people who spoke Arabic, to start talking to those people on the other side. And when you look at them, they all look the same: ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or just devout Muslims, or Jews, they all look the same. So you need intelligence, you need to start developing intelligence from the ground. And that developed into a full operations that went on for a couple of years, Operation Good Neighbor. You can see the figures. We also treated a couple of thousands of Syrians that we allowed them. We are at war with Syria, yes? But we opened the border and we brought them to Israeli hospitals so they could get treatment from Israeli doctors. And that went on for a couple of years until basically the situation calmed down. So that's tactical sensors. Operational sensors, again, is starting to be more complex. In 2005, we had one of two operations that we've done against the blue side, against our own Israeli civilians, the Jewish settlers in Gaza. Ariel Sharon was the prime minister, decided that he was going to uproot the 15,000 settlers in the Gaza Strip, what we call the Gush Katif, and disengage from Gaza militarily and civil as well. But no one wanted to take the job. Soldiers didn't want to take it because it's civilians. The police didn't want to take it because they didn't know how to do it. They were afraid that the Palestinians were going to use it as well to charge and disrupt this operation as well. And finally, a division commander, Gershon Cohen, again, he was an armored guy, but he had ties with the police, with the military, with the settlers, because his family came from the community of settlers. And he said, I have a way to do it. And this way that was information operations done on the blue side. And he paid a very heavy price personally for that. But he managed to do it in 5 days and without casualties. One of the reasons the police and the other military personnel were afraid to do it, they were afraid that it's going to be a civil war, an inside civil war in the Jewish community. So that's an operational sensor. He was a division commander, and he could do something that even the chiefs didn't know how to do. And the last one that I mentioned is our politicians. Again, I'm talking about the Israel context. Especially in the style of Israeli politics, which is a parliament, it's a parliament democracy, 120 members of parliament. The prime ministers traditionally are very, very strong individuals, and they have ways to bypass the institutions. Benjamin Netanyahu is definitely one. What Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump say to each other, we call them four eyes, or when this meeting between Putin and the new Prime Minister Naftali Bennett took place a couple of days ago, would they talk to each other without anyone else, without their staffs, without their advisors, is precious intelligence. Now, if they come back and the military generals don't have a way to extract this information from this politician, they are going to miss the next time they are going to sell something to these politicians, because they will be missing information that they can't get anywhere else. And our politicians are doing information operations along with us. They're doing deception operations along with us. They can say one thing to one general, another thing to another general. Politics has no rules. So if you appreciate that kind of sensors, and I'll give examples to that afterwards, if you don't know how to do it, find ways to do it. Okay, so moving on to finally Colombia. I'm going to share with you some pensamientos from insights from our seminar 3 years ago. One of to our surprise, I mean, I've never met General Mejia before, and he was just natural for me in talking about operational design. I'm used to Israeli generals talking about why we need it, why we need system thinking, why we need design in the military, but that was such a pleasant surprise. So we started by talking about the institutional necessity, the complex reality of Colombia, the complex rivals of Colombia, the complex political military relations, the complex international stance of Colombia, and you can see why I identify with what is said as the Israeli, because all of these apply to Israel as well. And so that I don't, so that I stay true to what the general said, I'm looking at my notes, and he said that Colombian leaders, they live complexity due to, and again, as you mentioned it as well, to over 50 years of experience operating in a complex web of state and non-state actors, from the international to the local domain. And he said that everything is closely connected, and the military must understand it as a whole, to have a comprehensive vision. Because you have trafficking, you have illegal mining, you have extortions and kidnapping, you have money laundering, you have economic warfare against guerrilla, and you have sensitive politicians-military relations. The second thing that he mentioned was the rhythm of reality. When the government demands help from the military on many civilian issues, and the police as well. And the third thing that he mentioned was that the military was dealing with concepts and threats that were not traditional military. Remember what I said about the language of design? So it's threats that are not traditional in military, against your organizational DNA, like a brigade that protects the environment, or a brigade that fights illegal mining. So these were some of the insights that he shared with us in his speech at the conference, which brought us, when I'm saying us, it's me, Philippe, and Mathieu Primont, from the Archipelago of Design, who ran the workshop on design. We understood it as the natural intuition of the Colombians. This tacit intuition to appreciate the complexity of reality and to appreciate the necessity to do things that are not planning, to do things that are not battle space awareness. But it was also because of the friction that you had with your changing enemies. And we thought that should be this natural environment to continue developing systemic operational design for the leaders in a context that is not Israel. For that you need, and this is also something that General Mejia said in his speech, for that you don't need tanks, you don't need airplanes, you need education, education, education. But there was also a warning in that seminar that came from the discussions done by the colonels who participated in the workshop, which is if we follow the West, and this is true also for Israel and for Colombia, if we follow the West without thinking critically, then we may be in trouble because the West doesn't understand complexity as we do, doesn't understand the implicit nature of reality as we do, and has maybe a different set of values that is also problematic for us. And this is not going to go into details because again, I told you, it was an intimate seminar, but I think you can get the overall feel of the drift, of the change that was needed, that the participant talked about. And that was around Colombia, again, trying to become a global partner of NATO. We are a Middle Eastern, Israel is a Middle Eastern partner of NATO, but really NATO prefers that we don't meddle in NATO business because we always bring trouble. I think the Colombian armed forces were doing tremendous, really admirable efforts to join NATO through the efforts of writing doctrine and westernizing the military. But as the Israel, I saw this also as a warning because you were losing your intellectual independence and you have a rich cultural heritage. And I thought that you were offering the world, you weren't offering the world what you have advantage on, and you were going to join the world with stuff that you still had to learn. And by this I mean irregular warfare, negotiations with terrorist groups, living complexity, and so on and so on. And obviously this is all in tension with the need for legitimacy that Israel and Colombia obviously share. So strategy was about trying to find a way to, because you need all of them. You need intellectual independence, but you want to have a joint doctrine of NATO. You need to offer the world something that is unique to you and you have the advantage on, but that is in tension with legitimacy. And you need to do this all at the same time. And this is what strategy needs to do. So we call it Taming the Tiger, and this is a photo that we took at the last day. I still show this photo because I don't have a photo like this with my IDF levels. Maybe one day I will. Okay, I covered that. So what are the similar stances when I look at Israel and Colombia? What are the similar things that I recognize? And look at how big Colombia is, and look at how, you can't even see Israel on the map. The red circle is 10 times bigger than the actual size of Israel on that map. First of all, and these are all my interpretations, both Israel and Colombia are islands of excellence among failed states. In the case of Israel, Lebanon is on the brink of just falling apart. Iran, Syria, Jordan, these countries are keeping rescued. The Palestinian Authority, the Gaza Strip. They are not countries that are self-sustaining. I'll be very cautious when I'm talking about your region, but I'm thinking of Venezuela and maybe other countries as well. So these are islands of excellence or villas in the jungle. There is also this expression. And the people around us, or the countries around us, or the societies around us, they're envy. And envy is a very dangerous thing. And usually the troubles don't remain at bay. They find ways from the jungle or from the failed states to threaten the stability of our own countries. This one I also already mentioned, and take East and West very liberally, okay? It could be East and West from an economic perspective, like communism and capitalism. It could be East and West in the perception of time and space. It could be East and West talking about Russia or the United States. But we're in between. And it's not even a question if we want to choose. I'm not sure we can choose. Definitely Israel cannot really choose to let go of either US or Russia. It has ties to both. It cannot ignore either. It needs to take into consideration their interests. So this is what I call East and West. Special assets, obviously, each of us in our own region. This brings, especially for Israel, this also brings trouble. Many times they refer to Israel as a small devil and the US as the big devil. Last week there was an attack on an American base in Syria by Iranian drones, and they said that the attack on the US base was because an Israeli alleged, according to Open News, alleged attack on Iranian targets in Syria. So they target US bases because of Israeli supposedly actions. We both have heterogeneous societies. Daniel, we talked about it in the morning, which causes us to lose face in the world because of the tensions. In Israel, it's the ultra-Orthodox, the Bedouins, the Israeli Palestinians or the Arab Palestinians, and so and so, and you have your fair share of it. But heterogeneous societies, on the one hand, remember they help us in thinking critically about ourselves and our identity, but obviously operationally and politically, a lot of trouble. There is no vacuum. Next to the borders, or maybe again, in your case, maybe it's also in the center of the country, there are areas that have very weak governance. And when there is weak governance, and when there is no control, like the frontiers, it knows no vacuum. And if the terrorists are there, if the resistance groups are there are the global resistance groups who keep migrating. So from Afghanistan, now you see Al-Qaeda is back, and ISIS are back in Afghanistan. They're going to Africa. ISIS tried to go into Gaza and to the Palestinian Authority. Hezbollah has a very strong presence in Colombia. So it knows no vacuum, which I think is something that Israel and Colombia should have worked on a long time ago, the Hezbollah presence in Colombia and a way to hit them there. And obviously, another point, this constant friction that we have as societies, as politicians, as militaries, demands constant transformation. If other militaries are doing it once in 20 or 30 years, challenging all their assumptions about how they think, how they operate, their technologies, their forms of warfare, for our countries, the pace is a lot faster because our rivals keeps changing. And finally, it's another point that I know they are opening an Office of Innovation in Israel soon, Colombia. Defense, intelligence, counterterrorism also brings civilian innovation. The cyber in Israel is a startup nation. Many people who started these startups in Israel were formerly in intelligence, or in special operations, or in the Air Force, or in the Navy, doing technologies, doing surveillance, doing defense, and took it also to civilian and huge exits over the last 2 years. And what are the similar challenges that we hold? I couldn't resist, I'm sorry, that the BDS, there was some BDS movement here in Bogota. I think it's small, but still. The previous president acknowledged Palestine as an individual state. So even when we have mutual interests, these interests keep changing. And when I'm thinking of challenges, again, for both countries, I'm offering some food for thought. I don't have answers for this, okay? Can the United States be trusted? We are special assets, it's our ally, we take sometimes the heat for the US, sometimes the US take the heat for us. But can the US be trusted all the time, universally, regardless of what political party is in office? I mean, for Israel, the change from Donald Trump to Joe Biden, and not Biden himself, but the radicalization of the Democratic Party is hindering our relationship. Can NATO be trusted? I mean, look at what is happening to the Ukraine, to Belarus, to the Baltic states. They are being threatened, but NATO is doing nothing. Georgia, in 2007, wanted to join NATO. Also did tremendous effort to join NATO in 2007. And once the NATO didn't accept Georgia, the Russians invaded. So can NATO be trusted? And when I'm mentioning, especially Belarus, I mean, think of this plane, this commercial airline, that was shut down because an opposition leader, was an opposition activist, was on that plane. This was an act of war, and no one has done anything about it. The EU, NATO, or the UN. So can the UN be trusted? Look at the members of the Human Rights Council. Iran, Afghanistan. All these countries who hold very little respect to human rights. But Israel specifically suffers every time for political decisions and stuff that is being raised by these countries who are at war with us, causes us a lot of problems internationally. COVID is an interesting example. This is not necessarily Israel and Colombia, but I think the fact that we are heterogenic societies, as I mentioned, plays a bigger part here. I'm using COVID as an example. On the one hand, we saw that individual states cannot target COVID on their own. It has to be a global effort. But internally, in Israel, for example, until this day, the Arab Israelis or Palestinian Israelis, Palestinian Arabs, whatever they call them, or about 20% of society in Israel, they have no, it's not a respect, they don't trust, they have no trust of the government, so they don't get vaccinated. And they don't uphold the rules and order of COVID. So this is an example for COVID, but if we think of NATO, if we think of the UN, where does the national interest of a country, putting itself first in engagement with the interest of a coalition or an international organization, which comes first? And in the case of Israel, at least in the last 20 years, again from a legitimacy perspective, many times we have to favor the coalition interest over our own national interest. So as long as we're at least aware of that, it's okay. But sometimes this gets blurred, and this is very problematic. Because maybe we can, maybe one more sentence on how to do this. This is, for me, this is an example of when and how to go to the dark side. If you want to uphold your own national interests, but you know that you are going to suffer from it internationally, from a legitimacy perspective, you need to find a way to do this. And this fifth point is a debate that has been going on for a while now, of small states and medium states. Now, the term itself, I laugh at it because Israel is 9 million people, Colombia is 55 million people. Israel is definitely called a small state, Colombia may be a medium state, and I've heard countries like Canada, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, saying that they're small states or medium states, and therefore they never have their own strategy because they will always go second. They are always fighting in coalition, and they will always follow either the bigger the empire, or the coalition strategy, which makes totally no sense from a national perspective. So they are not thinking critically, and they're always frustrated. And the last point goes back to, again, I said soldiers, and I said Israel, and I said. Again, a common jargon, these last 2 years, we stopped talking about wars, because it's politically incorrect. We start talking about enemies because it's politically incorrect. So we start talking about global power competition. And we also talk about wars with no end. Now, why do I think it's a problem to say global power competition? The US and China are at war. It's an economic war, it's a technological war, but it is war. But you cannot call the Chinese, but they are dependent on them, so they can't call them their enemies, they can't call them their rivals. But it's a war in other means. So again, it's really questions of how do you position yourself and what you are willing to do And are you willing to do stuff militarily if it's war? If you call it a global power competition, then maybe you do sanctions and wait for the Iranians to stop developing a nuclear bomb. And we as Israelis have a hard time explaining that we use the jargon of war because many of our conflicts are existential conflicts. Now, Canada doesn't have existential conflicts. Denmark doesn't have existential, I'm talking about countries that I work with. They don't have existential conflicts. But I think Israel and Colombia have existential conflicts. And we have problems delivering that message to the world and trying to explain our posture when we operate in wars, even though there are wars with no end. And when I'm saying no end, yes, it's prolonged conflicts that they have no end. Usually, remember, this triad because of issues of legitimacy. So now I'm going to leave you. I'm also looking at my clock. 3 references. Now we're in the storytelling part for a moment, for a couple of minutes. I use 3 examples from the last year from the Israeli experience. Again, food for thought. I'm not saying that you can take it one-to-one and compare the Israeli and Colombian experience. Operation Guardian of the Walls, May 2021, so it's about half a year ago. Started, again, the question of starting when there is a war with no end is only a question of narrative, because you're always in the middle. But let's say that we take the accepted narrative that it started from what the Arabs said, a threat to the freedom of religion in the Temple Mount, in Al-Aqsa Mosque. So that's where they said it started. They said that the Israelis are not allowing the Muslims to go and pray on the Temple Mount, in Al-Aqsa. And Hamas decided, as defender of the Muslim faith, to launch rockets from Gaza. This link is very weak, but it worked. So first of all, you can see the beautiful dance, I'm joking obviously, the beautiful dance between the rockets launched from Gaza and the Iron Dome trying to take it down. Okay, so these are the rockets, and this is Iron Dome. This has been going on for over 2 weeks, every night. We're supposed to be in shelters, but it's too nice, so people go out and take photos. And I'm saying here, as you can see, crisis management and strategy making. I once spoke to a former US ambassador, Dan Kurtzer, and I asked him when in the American system and how and who with they devised strategy. And he looked at me and he laughed. And he said, when we are in office, we don't do strategy. We go from managing one crisis to the other because we don't have time. Again, reality is changing faster pace all the time. So we only do strategy when we lose. Then we have 4 years to think and take the time, and then maybe in the first 100 days of grace. So they're doing crisis management. So is that what we're doing as countries? We're just managing one crisis to the other, or do we do strategy? So for me, crisis management is losing the grip of reality. We didn't understand something and it blew on us, like Operation Guardian of the Walls. And if we manage to do strategy, and again, I'll give an example for it in a minute, I'm calling it doing a reset. Starting over, and starting over according to our own terms. Few figures that I think you will appreciate. I don't know how many of you are, it's the other side of the world, and the world has problems that are probably bigger than the Gaza Strip and Israel. But remember I said disengagement in 2005. The Palestinian Authority took over, which is the Fatah movement. Again, there are 2 big factions in the Palestinians, the Fatah, the PLO, which is Yasser Arafat and Abu Mazen, who is the current prime minister, and Hamas movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is identifying more with Qatar and Turkey. So the Palestinian Authority took over, but they were considered corrupt. And so there were elections, and Hamas said that the elections were fixed, and Hamas took over in 2007 in Gaza, and basically it is a state since then. You can see the conflicts from the disengagement. Every 2 to 3 years, we have what we call either a day of battle or a week of battle, or the most we had was in 2014, 5 weeks, again, of rockets and some land maneuver or just aerial strikes and intelligence strikes and special operations and so on. But just look at the numbers. Tunnels, rockets, mortars on their side, and from our side, once we had the Iron Dome, things got a little better. But if we look at Operation Guardian of the Wall, we have uncovered over 150 kilometers of tunnels. Tunnels is the underground metro for internal command and control in Gaza, but it also going under the border and comes out on the Israeli side. It took us 3 years to build an infrastructure that goes 30 meters deep underground so that they cannot make new tunnels. It is operative as we speak. For over 4,000 rockets were launched in 2 weeks. Over 1,200 mortars were launched during this time. Iron Dome had 93% of success, which is nice. So this is just numbers. On the top, you can see again the rocket attacks on Israel from the Gaza Strip over the years. And you can also see, what I find interesting, on the right side of the map, the colors. So this is basically Israel, the Golan Heights is up there with the Sea of Galilee, and Jordan will be on the right side of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. And the Gaza Strip is this gray matter next to the Mediterranean. So if you live on the border of Gaza, from the Israeli side, let's say 5 to 7 kilometers from the border, you have 15 seconds alarm. You have to find shelter in 15 seconds. Then you have the second belt, which is about 20 to 30 kilometers. You have 20 seconds, or 30 seconds. I live in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is about 50 kilometers from Gaza. We had 40 seconds to find shelter. And basically, it covers the entire Israel in just a matter of seconds. And from the Hezbollah side, from the north, it's the same, but we haven't had rockets from Hezbollah since 2006. So just imagine, okay, it's a country, again, a villa in the jungle, an island of Excelente, had more unicorns in the startup nation than any other country in the last year. But we still have wars with no end. Again, just for reference, the Gaza Strip is such a tiny thing, so why is it causing Israel such an international problem of legitimacy? And we're taken into the International Court of Law over Operation Guardian of the Walls as well. This tiny, tiny piece. There are no troubles elsewhere. So if we look here, two ideas again by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, two French philosophers. They talk about the state apparatus fighting the war machine. And this is what we see again escondido. So the states don't fight it because they have something to lose. So they use proxies. I guess you know that as well.